welcome to practiceteaching.com. My name is Stephen Moore, and I'd like to introduce to you today a way of organising your lesson into a logical sequence. I'm going to talk to you today about the PPP Triangle. This is a method of organising or sequencing your lesson into 3 clear stages so that each stage flows nicely into the next stage and it has a sound pedagogical underpinning for your lesson because each of the stages builds on the previous stage. Let's talk about the PPP Triangle. Now the PPP Triangle is this shape, this triangular or pyramid shape, because it represents the stages of the lesson in the sense that the teacher talking time is small at the beginning and the student talking time expands as the lesson progresses. So in the first stage, now the first P is presentation. The teacher is presenting the target language. The teacher will be talking somewhat, but this teacher talking time will reduce as we go down the triangle. So the first P is presentation. The second P is practice. And the third P is production. Let's talk about the presentation stage first. There are 3 parts to the presentation stage, and they're really important to do properly, because if you don't do this stage properly, you're going to have problems going on to the later stages. So 3 areas for you to consider when you're giving your presentation stage. And we're talking here about presenting new language to students, presenting the target language, which simply means the language that you're trying to teach the students in that particular class. Okay, the first stage that we're talking about is pronunciation. Second, we need to make sure the students have the meaning of the target language. And thirdly, we need to make sure that the students understand the form of the target language. Let's talk about what that means. First of all, when you're introducing target language, students need to know how to pronounce the language properly. You're going to have to drill the language, model the language, show students how to get the pronunciation right. The next part of the presentation is the meaning. This means helping students understand what the language means, the significance of the words or the phrases that you're teaching. If they don't understand the meaning, they're simply going to be like parrots, repeating the words without understanding what they're saying. The next stage is the form. This means how the language works. If it's a vocabulary item, it might mean the spelling of the language. If it's a grammar point, it might mean explaining the grammar rule, giving some examples of how the language works, the form of the language. Now, by the way, if you're teaching the spelling of the language, I recommend that you teach the sounds of the language first. If you first write the word, students may pronounce the word incorrectly because English spelling doesn't always match to the pronunciation. So, the first stage is presentation. You introduce the target language, help students to understand it, help them get the pronunciation, help them to understand how the language works, the form of the language. Once you're satisfied that you've done that, and you need to check that using concept questions, checking students' pronunciation, we need to move on to the next stage, which is the practice stage. Now this is sometimes also referred to as a controlled practice. It's called controlled practice because it involves the teacher giving a lot of support, if necessary, to the students. The teacher is quite hands-on. The teacher is there to monitor, to support, to give corrections where necessary, especially if the focus of the lesson is on accuracy. The teacher will be quite involved there, helping the students to use the language properly, naturally, correctly, with accuracy. Once the teacher is quite happy that the students have practice the language, they're using it well, you can then move on to the next stage. The next stage is the production stage, and production stage is sometimes referred to as a free practice. It's called a free practice because the teacher is much less involved. The students have much more freedom to practice on their own, to do an activity where the teacher is a lot more hands-off, a lot less involved. The teacher will be there to monitor, to give support as necessary, but in a much less involved way. So it's more of a chance for the students to show that, yes, they've understood the language, they've had some practice, and they're using it quite accurately and well. They can then move on to using it themselves a lot more. So that gives them some freedom to use the language themselves. So the lesson will move through these stages. Now what happens if you find something doesn't work? Perhaps you get to the practice stage and you find students are mispronouncing the word or they're using the grammar inaccurately. What you need to do then is you need to go back a stage. You need to take a step backwards and do the previous stage again. Go over the particular area where the problem is. If they're mispronouncing the word, you need to go back and you need to drill the pronunciation again, perhaps break it down even more closely, working on particular sounds that you've noticed are problem areas for the students. Once you're satisfied that they've got it, you can then try again, take a step forward and go on to the next stage again. As you see, teacher talking time is reduced at the start, becomes less as it continues. Student talking time is getting more and more involved, it's getting wider, it's becoming more part of the lesson, becoming more student-centred. So that's one of the great advantages of the PPP Triangle. It helps you to be student-centred, reduces teacher talking time, and each of these stages builds on to each of the previous stages. You can read more about this in the Intensive Practice Teaching course book, also the audio seminar which is available will cover a lot of this in more detail. Thank you for watching. This is practiceteaching.com. I'm Stephen Moore. Thank you.